The first time I saw Black Hollow House, it was already watching me. That was the only way I could explain the sensation, like a gaze pressing gently but persistently against my skin. The realtor had left the key beneath a stone shaped like a sleeping dog, exactly as she'd promised, and driven off in a flurry of gravel and relief. I stood alone at the edge of the property, staring at the tall, narrow house crouched at the end of a winding dirt road, and felt as though I had interrupted something mid-thought. The house was older than the surrounding forest. At least, that was how it seemed. The trees, white birch and knotted pine, leaned subtly away from it, their trunks curving as if they had grown around an invisible pressure. The windows were tall and dark, reflecting the late October sky in dull silver sheets. No curtains, no shutters, just blank, waiting glass. "You're projecting," I muttered to myself. I had come to Black Hollow House for silence. After the accident, after the long months of hospital corridors and antiseptic air, after the funeral with its wilted lilies and empty platitudes, I could no longer stand the city. The noise crawled inside my skull. Car horns sounded like screams. Laughter in the apartment above mine became accusations. Even the hum of the refrigerator at night felt like a pulse I couldn't escape. So, when I saw the listing for a secluded property at a suspiciously affordable price, I didn't ask enough questions. Now, standing at the rusted iron gate, I wondered if I should have. The key was colder than I expected. It left a faint metallic scent on my fingers as I pushed it into the front door's lock. The mechanism resisted at first, then gave with a sigh that sounded almost relieved. The door opened inward in a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the daylight. I stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and something older, damp wood and a trace of something sweet, like decaying flowers. My footsteps echoed too loudly in the narrow foyer. The floorboards were dark oak, scuffed but solid. A staircase rose directly ahead, its banister carved with intricate spirals that seemed too delicate for the otherwise severe architecture. I closed the door behind me. The latch clicked like the snap of teeth. "Hello?" I called, because houses deserve at least that courtesy. My voice traveled up the staircase and dissolved somewhere out of sight. The realtor had told me the electricity had been restored recently. I fumbled along the wall until I found a switch. When I flipped it, a single bulb overhead flickered to life, casting weak yellow light that exaggerated the shadows rather than dispelling them. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air. The foyer opened into a long corridor. On the left, a parlor with high ceilings and a fireplace choked with old soot. On the right, a dining room with a long table still standing beneath a sheet that had once been white. Beyond that, a kitchen with rusted fixtures and cabinets hanging slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry and expected to return. But the house did not feel abandoned. It felt paused. I told myself that this was good. The stillness I craved, the isolation I needed, to think, to write, to stitch my life back together with careful, solitary hands. I carried my single suitcase into the parlor and set it down. The sound reverberated more than it should have. The first whisper came that night. It was soft enough that I might have mistaken it for wind slipping through cracks in the walls. I was lying on a mattress I'd dragged into the master bedroom upstairs. I hadn't unpacked much, just enough to function: a blanket, a change of clothes, my notebook and pen. The whisper threaded through my half-sleep. At first, it sounded like my name. Mara. My eyes opened instantly. The room was almost entirely dark, lit only by a sliver of moonlight cutting through the tall window. The walls were bare, painted a shade of gray that looked almost blue in the dim light. Mara. The second time I was sure. It was not the wind. I sat up slowly, heart pounding so loudly I thought it might drown out the sound. The whisper didn't come from the door. It didn't come from the window. It came from the corner of the room where the shadows pooled thickest. "Hello?" I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. Silence answered. I told myself it was grief, that grief does strange things to the mind. It resurrects voices. It rearranges memories into hallucinations. I lay back down and forced my eyes closed. The whisper did not return that night. In the morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. Daylight transformed the house into something almost benign. The corridors seemed less oppressive. The windows, though still uncurtained, allowed pale autumn sunlight to spill across the floors. I explored the second floor properly. There were 4 bedrooms, each sparsely furnished with old, heavy pieces, wardrobes that smelled faintly of cedar, dressers with missing knobs, a vanity with a cracked mirror. The cracked mirror unsettled me the most. When I stood before it, my reflection fractured into multiple versions of myself, each slightly misaligned. My face seemed elongated in one shard, compressed in another. In the largest piece of glass, my eyes looked darker than I remembered. I leaned closer. For a moment, just a flicker, I thought I saw a shape standing behind me. I turned around. The room was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the shape was gone. I laughed then, a brittle sound that did not feel like mine. "You're alone," I said aloud. "That's the point." I spent the day cleaning. It felt important to claim the space physically, to wipe away the layers of neglect and assert my presence. I opened windows to let in fresh air. I swept floors, dusted surfaces, scrubbed the kitchen sink until my arms ached. By late afternoon, the house felt marginally more mine. That was when I found the door. It was hidden at the end of the upstairs hallway, nearly indistinguishable from the wall. The paint matched perfectly. No handle, just a faint seam outlining its shape. If I hadn't leaned against that section of wall while catching my breath, I might never have noticed the slight give beneath my palm. Curiosity overrided caution. I pressed harder. The door creaked inward on a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. Cold air rose from below, carrying the same sweet, decaying scent I'd noticed when I first entered the house. I stood at the top of the stairs for a long moment. Basements are logical spaces, foundations, storage. There was nothing inherently sinister about a hidden staircase in an old house. Still, my skin prickled. I retrieved a flashlight from my suitcase and descended. The steps were steep and uneven. Dust coated them thickly, undisturbed by footprints. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a low-ceilinged room with stone walls. Shelves lined one side, filled with glass jars whose contents had long since liquefied into murky shadows. The beam of my flashlight moved slowly across the room. In the center stood a single wooden chair. Ropes dangled from its arms. I froze. The ropes were frayed, darkened at the ends. They swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. "This is ridiculous," I whispered. "It's just an old house." But the air felt heavier down there, pressing against my chest. The sweet smell was stronger, almost cloying. My flashlight flickered. The beam dimmed, then brightened again. In that brief moment of darkness, I heard it. Breathing, not mine. Slow, deliberate, close. I spun in a circle, sweeping the light wildly. The stone walls revealed nothing. The shelves remained still. The chair stood patient and empty. The breathing stopped. I backed toward the stairs, unwilling to turn my back on the room. My foot caught on the first step, and I stumbled, barely managing to keep my balance. As I climbed, I felt it, an unmistakable sensation of being followed, not by footsteps, by attention. When I reached the top and slammed the hidden door shut, the house seemed to exhale. That night, the whisper returned. "Mara." It was clearer now, closer. I did not open my eyes. "You're not real," I said into the darkness. A pause. "Neither are you." The words were soft, almost tender. My eyes flew open. The corner of the room was darker than before. The shadows seemed to have thickened, gathering into a shape that did not conform to the geometry of the walls. My heart hammered painfully against my ribs. "I'm grieving," I whispered. "I know what this is. I know what this is." The shape shifted. "You left me," it said. The voice was no longer just a whisper. It was layered, my voice intertwined with another deeper tone that resonated in my bones. I didn't leave anyone, I said, though guilt surged hot and immediate. You did. The shadows moved along the wall, stretching, elongating. They crept toward the ceiling like spilled ink climbing upward. You left me in the dark. I squeezed my eyes shut. This was my mind punishing me. The accident had been sudden. Rain-slicked roads, a moment's distraction, headlights too close. I survived. He had not. I didn't mean to, I said, tears slipping silently into my hair. The bed dipped beside me. I felt the unmistakable impression of weight. Cold fingers brushed my cheek. You promised, the voice murmured. I screamed. The sound tore through the room, raw and desperate. The weight vanished instantly. The air grew still. I scrambled out of bed and switched on the lamp.